Very much, Anju. Thanks for that introduction. Hey, everybody. I am Pat McConnell. Why don't I go ahead and share my screen so we can get started here. You are also welcome to ask questions in the Whova app, and we'll address those at the end as well. Again, if anybody's here hoping for a session on retrospectives, I'm sorry that the prior speaker had kind of an emergency conflict and couldn't be here, but I'm very happy to fill in. What we're going to do is talk about Agile Anti-Patterns for a bit. So first up, let me introduce myself a little bit more. So I am an Agilist for well over a decade at this point. I started off as a product owner on teams building geospatial applications for government agencies here in the DC region. Then I became a Scrum Master for a while, and then I stepped into full-time Agile coaching for a bunch of years, ultimately becoming the director of Agile practices at one of the gigantic government-focused system integrator companies in town. That whole time, I was also pursuing becoming a certified Scrum trainer, and I finally did that a few years ago. And now I just get to do this all the time, teach classes and make grown-ups play silly games. And that's fun. So anyway, that's me. You can see some of the badges of some of the places I've worked there. Other stuff on this slide, you can see my Twitter on this slide at Bowtie Agility. That's my Agile Twitter account, Bowtie Agility. Just Agile stuff at that account. If you give it a follow, you won't see me yelling at Panera about a sandwich or something. Anyway, I am a trainer with Next Up Solutions based here in the DC region. We provide certified Agile training of all stripes, particularly Scrum Alliance courses, also Kanban University Safe, Agile Coaching Institute a bit too, I think. And we are Acceleration, which is the #3 ranked technology externship in the entire gosh darn country. So that's us. All right, so why don't we go ahead and dive in. We're going to talk about anti-patterns tonight that we see a lot around Agile teams. I thought I would start with a formal definition because that seemed like a proper nerdy thing to do. Agile anti-patterns defined, an anti-pattern is a common solution for a common problem that typically ends up making things worse. I'm going to use a little bit broader definition of anti-pattern. It's not just a solution for a problem. Sometimes it's also the problem itself. But that phrase anti-pattern gets thrown around a whole lot. What we're going to do is actually compare anti-patterns to see what is the absolute worst thing that we can think of. And what I've done is this. This is a Miro board here you may have seen before. What I'm going to do is I'm going to drive this Miro board. What I've got here basically is the world's worst version of March Madness. I've populated this with a whole bunch of anti-patterns. I take a bunch of them from the Agile Anti-Patterns cards that Adam Weisbart put out. Adam's a friend of mine. And I took that idea, I added a few more, and I use it to play this game. So if you're interested in that deck, of course, you can check him out at weisbart.com. Anyway, let's take a look at what we've got here. Here's what we're going to do. I need your help a bit. I could just pick through these things, but you watching me do that probably wouldn't be all that interesting. Now, because we're in a webinar format, we're a little bit limited in what we can do for controls. So what we're going to do is, as I make these comparisons one at a time, I want you to vote. And the way you'll vote is just by using the raise hand feature in the participants window. Okay, so everybody should be able to raise hand and lower their own hand because I can't do it all at once. All right, so let's try that right now. Can I see everybody use the raise hand feature at once? All right, lots and lots and lots of hands being raised. Cool, cool, cool. Very good. Yep, use that raise hand feature. Great. All right, I think I've got at least half of the participants raising hands. That's great. All right, now what I'd like you to do is use the lower hand feature to make your raised hand go away. Awesome. All right, I think this is going to work. Cool. All right, so here's what we're going to do. We're going to use that. And each time I do one of these comparisons, I will tell you that I want you to raise hand if you think the top one should win, or leave your hand lowered if you think the bottom one should win. Then I'll ask everybody to lower their hands again, back to a clean slate, and we'll do the next thing. All right. So I see one hand still raised. Why don't you go ahead and lower that one, Mr. Mounts? That would be great. Thank you. All right, so let's go ahead and zoom in. Just as if this was actual March Madness, I've got this separated into 4 brackets here. The Northwest, the Northeast, the Southwest, the Southeast, and each round is named. So in this initial round, our first matchups, these are our preliminary perils. All right, so let's see which worse in the Northwest bracket for preliminary perils, and I'll zoom in a bit here. Let's start with this matchup. Our daily scrum lasts 45 minutes, or our product owner doesn't know what we should build. She changes direction every sprint. If you think the top one, our daily scrum lasts 45 minutes, is worse, raise your hand. If you think the bottom one is worse, leave your hand lowered. Give people a minute here. All right. Okay, looks like I've got 10 votes for our daily scrum lasts 45 minutes. That's pretty bad, but I've got a lot more no votes. That means this bottom one wins. Our product owner doesn't know what we should build. She changes direction every sprint. All right, cool. All right, everybody lower your hands. We'll do this again. There we go, there we go, there we go. All right, next up, we'll do just 1 minute for this voting here. Our two choices are, we usually just skip our retrospective since we've been Agile for a while, or our product owner and Scrum Master are the same person. If you like the top one as being worse, raise your hand. If you think the bottom one is worse, leave your hand lowered. I'll put 1 minute on the clock. Ooh. All right, a lot of votes for the top. A lot of votes for the top. A whole lot of votes for the bottom, though. Our product owner and Scrum Master, the same person. I think that one advances. All right, everybody lower your hands. Thanks. All right, next up, next matchup. We've got here, we're doing a documentation sprint before we stop coding, or we're in a hurry, so we'll do QA after this sprint. Which one is worse? Raise your hand if you want the top one. Leave your hand lowered if you prefer the bottom one as being worse. All right, I think the bottom one is almost a sweep here. All right, we're going to move that one forward. Well done. Last matchup here for the bottom. Let me do this. All right, there we go. Go ahead and lower hands again. Thank you. Here we go. Now, we don't have to plan stuff now that we're Agile. We do stuff on the fly. Or my boss added some tasks to our sprint. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom one. All right. Let's see there. Okay. I think this one's a little closer. All right. I think maybe the bottom one just has it by a nose, a buzzer beater. All right, that wraps up the preliminary perils for the Northwest bracket. Now let's go to the Southwest. Here we go. Everybody clear your votes again. All right, there we go. Our first matchup in the Southwest bracket is, which one's worse? The chief architect hasn't approved that yet, or we have a lot to do this sprint, so let's make it 3 weeks instead of 2. Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom one. All right, I think the bottom one is taking this one. All right, let's clear our votes. Let's go up to our next matchup here. We can never get in touch with our product owner, or there are 15 people on our Scrum team. Raise your hand if you think the top one's worse. Leave it lowered for the bottom one. Ooh, yeah, clear front runner. The top one, I think, gets this one in a romp. All right, well done. Go ahead, clear your votes. Next up, we don't see our Scrum Master much because their other teams keep them pretty busy, or we can't hire a Scrum Master, so the dev team just rotates the job every sprint. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top, leave it lowered for the bottom. Oof. A lot of votes coming in for that top one. All right. There we go. I think again, the top one kind of by a nose, because I think a number of people are kind of not voting, so it's a little hard to tell. But all right, I think the top one, Scrum Master with a lot of teams, sounds like a bad idea. All right, go ahead, lower your hands. Let's look at this next matchup. We can never agree on story point estimates for our status meetings, or in sprint planning, we have to make sure everyone has enough tasks for the sprint. Which one is worse? Raise your hand for the top. We can't agree on point estimates for status meetings, or leave it lowered for in sprint planning, we have to make sure everyone has enough tasks for the sprint. Oh, top one coming in hot, I think. Lower one maybe has a shot. And we got, it's creeping up. A lot of careful consideration going on up there. Okay. All right, I think I got to give this one to the bottom one, though it's close. All right. So that brings us to the end of the Southwest. Let's go up to the Northeast. Let's take a look at what we got. Go ahead, lower your hands. Let's start with this first matchup. Our team is never the same. It changes depending on what needs to be done during a sprint, or our vice president wants to know what tasks everyone is working on at any given point. Raise your hand for the top, leave it lowered for the bottom. All right, I think these both seem pretty bad. Seems pretty close. I think the bottom one gets it, though. All right, we'll move that one forward. Next up, here we go. I worked all night to make sure we finished this sprint. Or I was assigned that story by my manager. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom one. All right, here we go. I think bottom one's going to take this one again. All right, I'm going to move that one forward. Next matchup. We have to make sure our estimates match up with what other teams would do, or we're almost done with the requirements sprints and then we'll start the development sprints. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top, leave it lowered for the bottom. Yeah, I think bottom one's coming out strong on this one. All right, I'll move that one forward. Next up, last of this bracket. When we don't finish something, we count the points we finished as velocity and roll the rest over to the next sprint. Or we have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time. Raise your hand for the top one being worse. Leave it lowered for the bottom one. Ooh, top one's racking up some votes. I think the bottom one's staying strong, though. All right, we'll move that one forward. As we're going through these, by the way, make sure to ask in Whova or save a question for the chat at the end if you're not sure why one of these things is an anti-pattern. We definitely want to talk about it. All right, the last of our 4-quarter brackets. Let's take a look here at sales committed us to deliver specific features on a certain date. We have no choice but to finish. Or our vice president said we need to improve our velocity since the other team is faster. Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom one. All right, I think bottom one is taking this one. All right, remember, none of these are happy, but some of them are worse than others. That's the idea. All right, let's take a look at the next one. I was pulled off this sprint and put onto an emergency project again. Or we can't start our work until we get sign off on the spec. Oops, that's supposed to be sign off, not sing off. Although sing off would be maybe more fun. There we go. All right, top one's racking up some votes. I think the bottom one, though, is going to take this one again. All right, there we go. Next matchup. My bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year. Or that story will take 2 sprints and there's no way to make it smaller. Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom one. Ooh, I think Pretty conclusively, people feel like the top one is worse. All right, last of our initial matchups. I love being agile since it means I don't have to write documentation anymore. Or my boss is on my team. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom. Oh, top one's coming in fairly strong. Boss is on my team. I don't know. I think boss on my team has a lot of votes too. Hard to tell. Going up and down, going up and down. All right, I think this is a toss-up. I think maybe we have to go with bosses on my team because we're losing some votes there. All right, well done. That brings us to the end of our initial preliminary perils round. That means it's time to move on to the Sorry 16. So let's take a look at these Sorry 16 folks. First matchup, our product owner doesn't know what we should build. They change direction every sprint. Or our product owner and Scrum Master are the same person. Which one of those is worse? Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom. Oh, top one, I think, is taking this one in a romp. All right, next matchup. We're in a hurry, so we'll do Q&A after this sprint. Or my boss added some tasks to our sprint. Raise your hand for the top, leave it lowered for the bottom. Oh, getting close, getting close. Oh, I think this one's taking it. All right, we're going to move that one. All right, next up, let's take a look at down here. We have a lot to do this sprint, so let's make it 3 weeks instead of 2. Or we can never get in touch with our product owner. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom. Oh, yeah, I think we can never get in touch with our product owner seems to be the bigger problem. Next up, we don't see our Scrum Master much because their other teams keep them pretty busy. Or in sprint planning, we have to make sure everyone has enough tasks for the sprint. Which one of those is worse? Raise your hand for the top, leave it lowered for the bottom. Ooh, pretty clearly, I think top one is sweeping it. All right. Almost all the way there. Let's take a look at the Northeast. Here we go. Our vice president wants to know what tasks everyone is working on at any given point. Or I was assigned that story by my manager. I think both of these things are getting at a similar problem. Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom. All right. I think the bottom one is taking it. Close matchup, but I think the bottom one's taking it. All right, here we go. We're almost done with the requirements sprints, and then we'll start the development sprints. Or we have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top. Leave it lowered for the bottom. Ooh, I think we have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time is worse. Okay. Next one. Our vice president said we need to improve our velocity since the other team is faster. Or we can't start our work until we get sign off on the spec. Which one's worse? Raise your hand for the top. Oh, we're getting a lot of votes there on the top. I think this was going to win. I think so. Oh, come on, mouse. There we go. All right. Yep, pretty close. I think the top one took it based on momentum there. Next up, my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year, or my boss is on my team. Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom. Oh. All right. I think top one is taking this. All right. The lower one had some strong support in the last round, but I think the top one takes it this time. All right. That means we're now past the Sorry 16 and down to our Evil 8, the quarterfinal. Let's see what we've got here. Evil 8, top up, top left. Our product owner doesn't know what we should build. They change direction every sprint, or we're in a hurry, so we'll do Q&A later. Raise your hand for the top one. Leave it lowered for the bottom. All right, I think top one wins this one. We have our first semifinalist. All right, let's take a look now at down here, Southwest. we can never get in touch with our product owner, or we don't see our Scrum Master much because their other teams keep them pretty busy. Raise your hand for the top, leave it lower for the bottom. Seems like the top is taking this one in a romp. All right, cool. That's our second semifinalist. Next up, I was assigned that story by my manager, or we have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time. All right, I think the bottom one is taking this one. All right, one more semifinalist to figure out here. We've got our vice president said we need to improve our velocity since the other team is faster, or my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year. Oh, I think we've got pretty clear agreement that the bottom one is the worst of these. That brings us down from the evil 8 to our fatal 4. Well done. We've got our fatal 4 here. Let's resolve the North. Who's going to be our finalist? We've got our product owner doesn't know what we should build. They change direction every sprint, or we have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time. Raise your hand for the left one over here, the Northwest. Leave it lowered for the Northeast. Fairly evenly split field, though. I think Northeast takes it. All right, we're moving that one down here. We have to plan out our sprint 6 months at a time is a finalist. All right, bottom bracket, Southwest versus Southeast. We've got, we can never get in touch with our product owner, or my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year. Raise your hand for the left one, Southwest. Leave it lowered for Southeast. Ooh, pretty even, I think. Yeah, so it might be kind of hard to call. I think maybe that the one on the right is taking it just by a nose. Okay, so that brings us to our absolute final here. What is the absolute most worstest of these anti-patterns? We have to plan out our sprints 6 months at a time, or my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year. Raise your hand for the top one, leave it lowered for the bottom. Ooh, where are we going to be? Where are we going to be? I think it might be close. I think the bottom one is sweeping. Folks, we have a winner. The absolute worst of these anti-patterns is my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year. Well done. They were a distant favorite. We didn't know if we'd pull it out. It's an amazing show. Well done. All right, so none of those things are probably fun. You can go ahead and lower hands at this point, unless you're getting in queue for a question later. So that was kind of fun, right? We've got our worst of these Agile anti-patterns. What I'd like to do now is just from here, we can go ahead and open it up for questions, I think. What I'm particularly interested in is if you're not sure why any of these things that we talked about are anti-patterns, or you're not sure why people would do that, I don't know, just questions about anti-patterns in general, I'm happy to chat with you about them. So let's see what we got.
So folks, feel free to put your questions in the chat window. You can, put them in the Hua app, in the Q&A session or Zoom chat.
Mm-hmm. See, I've got a couple of hands raised there. Let's see. So we've got a question in Huva, I see here. What would be a good response or mitigation plan for the #1 anti-pattern? Yeah, so let's talk about why my bonus is based on how many product backlog items I complete this year is an anti-pattern, first of all. In case you're not sure, the idea here is what we're really doing is we're valuing and focusing busyness rather than value. So a lot of times I call this pattern confusing velocity for value. So we're incentivizing people to do backlog items, but backlog items, whether we're a Scrum team or a Kanban team or whatever, don't necessarily automatically correlate to value. They're maybe how we get to value. But value is a business outcome of some kind when things are out there, in the real world or production or whatever that means. If instead we incentivize people to do more backlog items, they're going to get really good at playing that game, at doing stuff. They might not ever ship anything. That's the problem. So to mitigate that, we've got to do some coaching. We've got to get people to understand that we want to focus and visualize value delivery, actual outcomes, not output. In fact, our real goal is to deliver the most outcome for the least output. And we get people to understand that. That often means reconfiguring, for example, the visualization and control mechanisms in an organization from things that they're focusing on like velocity because they're easy and they feel like what we used to do when we were keeping track of progress in Gantt charts or something, onto things that are harder to see but more important, like revenue or users gained or reduction in operations and maintenance costs, things like that. So that's what I would do with that one. Let's see, I'm going through questions on Whova here, unless there are ones in the chat that I'm not seeing. We had a question in Whova, is there a special category for government anti-patterns? In a way, there probably is almost. And certainly I'm not trying to trash public sector work, since that's the bulk of my history. And I've done a whole lot of good stuff with a whole lot of great people in that environment. But there are extra complications sometimes that come from very, very large institutions like a government agency buying Agile-based delivery as a service and not really understanding how that works. So for example, I could probably generate an entire game here just based on the anti-patterns we see baked into Agile contracts. If you want a quick example, like, okay, we want Agile teams, so I'll tell you what, you're not going to bid in dollars, you're going to bid in points. But points don't have any meaning, and we might not even want to use points on a team and whatever. Well, too bad, we've decided that points are a proxy for dollars, so that's what we want you to bid in contracts on, or something like that. So yes, I would say there's probably all sorts of government-specific anti-patterns that I've run into a whole lot. They're not in this game because I consider this game kind of a more general audience who isn't necessarily specialized in public sector work. But yeah, there's a lot of them. Let's see here. I see a hand from Jessica Drusen. I don't know if you've asked something in the chat or if it's in Whova. I don't know if there's a way to call on you.
There's another question that I see.
Okay.
Does a company need to be able to afford to Scrum, have the money to hire POs and Scrum leads?
The short answer to that, I would say, is yes. So you'll notice one of the anti-patterns that was in here, and one I see a whole lot, is something like this one. Our product owner and Scrum Master are the same person. That's a particular type of anti-pattern. The problem with that is that what we get is the person who's supposed to own questions of what and why and when being conflated with the same person who's supposed to be coaching process and integrity and looking out for health and well-being. And people tend to sacrifice one role for the other. That's a problem. Another common problem that I see, for example, is not having a dedicated Scrum Master when we're trying to do Scrum, and instead making it someone from the development team or one of the developers. The problem with that is that that means that they typically don't have the time to actually focus on doing the job of Scrum Master well, which means maybe that a team never stabilizes, they never embrace a culture of continual experimental improvement, they never get to a level of high performance, where they would if they actually were provided a Scrum Master. The reason why that tends to be an anti-pattern most often is the background conditions that lead to making someone be more than one role. Like, we sort of have a Scrum Master, but they're really a developer, or we sort of have a Scrum Master and product owner or something like that. Usually it's because the institution doesn't understand the value of a Scrum Master. And so they feel like they have to have one to check a box, but they don't want to pay for one. And then we make some sacrifices like that. So what I would say is, if we want Scrum to work, we need to give people the time to do their roles well. Give the product owner the time to focus on just doing product ownership. Give the Scrum Master the time to just focus on being a Scrum Master for one team. Or if they're really good, maybe two teams, maybe, but one is best. Next up, there's a question here, is Agile not well understood an anti-pattern, how to mitigate it? Yes, although I'm not entirely sure what you're asking with this question, because Agile itself isn't a method or a framework. Agile is a bundle of practices, including things like Scrum or extreme programming or Kanban in terms of frameworks, and also a lot of affiliated, engineering practices. Often, if we're talking about software, things like pair programming, test-driven development, continuous delivery, continuous integration. Where we don't understand the intention of a particular Agile framework, and particularly its background assumptions, yes, that becomes an anti-pattern. So, for example, we want to do Scrum, but everybody is matrixed across 12 teams. Well, Scrum really assumes that people are only on one team together and that they get to be a team long enough to learn how to be a team. If they're matrixed across the entire organization on 12 teams, they're really on no teams. And that's an example of the kind of anti-pattern you see a lot from not understanding why the kind of basic rules of a framework like Scrum exist. If you can't do the basic rules of Scrum, maybe another Agile framework would work for you, like say Kanban or something. But you aren't doing Scrum anymore, and we shouldn't expect Scrum to work if we're going to sacrifice the handful of constructs that kind of prop up that framework.
Thanks, Patrick. There's another question. Can you expand on the one regarding requirement sprints before development sprints and type?
Yeah, so let's zoom in on that one. Where was it? It was, yeah, here we go. We're almost done with the requirement sprints, and then we'll start with the development sprints. In fact, this one I could maybe put in a deck of public sector specific anti-patterns. This is really waterfall at scale and Scrum maybe on a team basis, right? So the notion in a framework like Scrum, if we're operating sprints, is that we are continuously defining and refining requirements in a process that we call backlog refinement. And every sprint, a Scrum team takes some of those and builds them all the way to a level of done that is potentially releasable if we want to. With this particular anti-pattern that you're looking at here, we're almost done with the requirement sprints, and then we'll start the development sprints. We're falling back into a waterfall type mentality of we can know all the stuff up front and define all those requirements in advance, and then we'll just build them in increments, which is still waterfall with another name, or sometimes people call it scrumafall or waterfail, or kind of whatever you want. We're really missing the point that requirements development is a continual iterative process informed by the feedback of a Scrum team delivering things continually. So that's the problem with this one.
Thanks, Patrick. Another one from Joyce. While we all have anti-patterns, what is the best way to tackle and mitigate them? Do a game like this with the team and fix the ones the team think are the worst first?
I think that's a fantastic approach. I mean, basically what you're describing is more or less a retrospective discussion that a Scrum team, for example, might be having every sprint. We might not explicitly be talking about the challenges in front of us as anti-patterns, but the process of what are the biggest issues in front of us right now, which one of those should we pick to do something about, that really is more or less a retrospective conversation. If for whatever reason your team is having problems talking about these things, a game like this could help you bring them to the surface, could make it okay for people to discuss them. So one thing I've done with this game, for example, is both virtually and kind of in-person versions, I pass out cards to people. We have a conversation like this about which one's worse, but then we also have a conversation of, is this a thing that's happening here? And if it is, then that becomes a way for us to get to it when maybe people know it's happening, but they're embarrassed to bring it up, or they don't necessarily, want to raise that issue themselves.
Another question. Can you speak about this story can't be split any smaller?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so in Scrum, for example, we have the notion that a backlog item is refined enough for a team to do it in sprint, among other considerations when it's small enough, meaning we have to be able to get the thing done in a sprint, or if it's too big for that, we have to break it into smaller pieces. Sometimes people feel like that's not possible, and usually that's just because they haven't had enough practice decomposing backlog items, or no one's ever given them some techniques. So commonly, for example, we can split backlog items by workflow step, or by operation, or by differences in personas that might use them, or even in rule variations, for example, all of those might be levers that we can use to break a large backlog item into a smaller bit that is still a vertical slice that is demonstratable and testable and has value that we could finish within a sprint. Go ahead.
Can you talk more about how you use the anti-pattern game with your team? Was it in retro? Once you picked the winner, what did you do next?
So I think I just kind of spoke to this one a second ago, but in a nutshell, it's, this game might be kind of a fun exercise for the team that's a little silly, but then when we're done, then we can start to use that as an, is this happening here? Or if it's not happening here and it did start to, what could we do about it? And you could use that as almost a future perspective, for example, imagining the future, let's say. Let's see, I'm scrolling through questions. Any others that I haven't answered here?
Just looking through.
Yeah. That's all the ones I see on my, okay. Will the link for the Miro be shared so we can try the game with our teams? I can try to do that, yes. We'll see. The only thing is, I can't really be resetting the board all the time, but you could certainly copy this approach. You could also go to Adam Weisbart's site down here, weisbart.com, and get your very own physical deck of these cards if you want to. So again, he wrote most of them or compiled most of them, and then I wrote a few more just to fill out the full brackets. So
I see other questions coming up. There are two teams within one 10-member Scrum team. Because both of them work on two complete technologies, COTS application, how do I blend them?
Wow. It's hard to answer that question without knowing a lot more about your context. Off the top of my head, I would say, I would ask why we need to blend them. We could easily have 2 5-person teams, and that might be okay. If it's because of funding reasons or whatever, or I don't know, there's some other thing that really forces this to be a single team of people working on what sounds like 2 separate products, we could maybe start to blend them, for example, by very aggressively doing cross-training and skill sharing so that I end up with one team that can do both things. That might free us up and give us more agility. So yeah, that's probably the kind of 2 paths I would look at. Either we need to aggressively kind of cross-train to make them one team, among other things, or talk about why they can't just be 2 separate teams.
Thanks, Patrick. Another question, can you explain the one about the boss assigned the story?
Yeah, let's see here. So, and there's a couple that are kind of similar. So my boss added some tasks to my sprint is one, and then my boss, I was assigned that story by my manager, for example. The reason this is a problem is kind of a couple of things. In Scrum, in Kanban, in most Agile frameworks, including extreme programming too, there isn't really the notion of a formal manager. What does the manager do in this context? And that's kind of something outside of, say, the Scrum framework. The way on a Scrum team, for example, work is assigned, whether it's a backlog item or a task, is the team agrees which backlog items they'll do this sprint, negotiating between developers and product owner. And then in the sprint, the developers, the folks on the development team, self-organize and self-manage and assign that work to themselves, negotiating amongst themselves every day who will do what. So by having somebody outside the team assign work to individual team members, what we're really doing is not committing to allowing this team to be self-organizing or self-managing. We're usurping their ability to manage themselves when they know better than anybody else who's the best person on the team to do that, or how should we collaborate together to get that done. So that's why that's typically a problem.
Thanks, Patrick. Folks, do we have any other questions that Patrick can answer for you? If yes, then please go ahead and put it in Q&A or the chat window.
All right. let's see, that might be it. Well, I'll tell you what, I'm certainly happy to continue to be here while people answer questions. Let's see, I've got a new one here. It says, teams not participating well in a retrospective, how do we address it? I think this might be a question for the session that was intended to be here, and the speaker had a last minute conflict. So the short answer that I would give you about retros is we find ways to keep it up and keep it feeling fresh, switch up the exercises, find new patterns for retros, Tasty Cupcakes, for example, or Retro Mat. Lots of great resources out there. Recess Kit, that's another good one. Oh, that's a paid service. Yeah, but if we find kind of new patterns and get people engaged, that can help a lot. If we've been doing them the same way all the time, they can get stale. That's a common problem with those.
Thanks, Patrick. Third question, what is a manager's function in corporations?
What is a manager's function in corporations? That's a fantastic question. And the answer I would have to give you is I don't necessarily know. These days, most of the things we think of as classical management behaviors, a lot of those command and control patterns telling people what to do all day, most Agile frameworks have that decision-making taken up by team members. And we get a lot better decisions out of that. People tend to like that more. We get better motivation because we're going towards those classical mastery, autonomy, and purpose kind of dimensions that we know help people do great work. So what's left for the manager to do apart from telling people what to do all day? In a lot of the organizations I've been in, what's left is a lot of bureaucratic functions. It's timesheet mechanics, it's approving leave, it's dealing with performance reviews, all those kind of things. And one thing we might ask when we make an Agile transition to, let's say we went from lots of command and control silo teams to a bunch of great Scrum teams or something like that, we can start to ask ourselves, which of those patterns do we still need? Do we still need someone in that role doing that? Is that a behavior that can be assumed by teams, or is it a behavior we can put down? So for me, what is the role of a manager in a corporation is something that I think has been kind of undergoing negotiation over the last 10 years. And different organizations are finding different answers to that question. I think one of the most interesting versions of that I've seen is people that used to be managers now are really enterprise-wide servant leaders and kind of human growth shepherds. And that's certainly what we talk about, for example, like in certified Agile leadership courses, is we take a look at things like, how do I transform from someone who tells people what to do into someone whose whole job is growing the skills and abilities of my people and getting things out of their way? So that really, it's not being a manager anymore. It's just flat out servant leadership. I think that's a very cool way to reinterpret that role.
Thanks, Patrick. Another question.
Hey, so just checking on you. I think we are coming on time. If we have more questions, I think we can. That chat will be available, Patrick, and I think Hoover will be available for you too. And if at all we have more questions, you can post those questions right there on the chat, and Patrick will be available to answer those. This was a great session, Patrick. We enjoyed the game. This was fabulous.
Good. I'm glad. I hope folks enjoyed it. On the screen there, you also see my contact info. If there's ever anything I can help you out with or that Next Step can do for you, reach out. Again, my Twitter is Agile Stuff Only. That's Bowtie Agility, so bow ties. And if you do LinkedIn, by all means, reach out and connect. A few people have already sent me connection requests during the session. So I'll be very happy to make your acquaintance. And of course, Next Step's on all the socials as well. Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, you name it. We do webinars, all that kind of stuff, blog posts, all that kind of thing. So hopefully I get to meet a bunch more of you in person throughout the next few years, and stay safe. And thanks for coming to our session, folks.
Awesome. All right.
Patrick.
Thank you so much, Patrick. Thank you, everybody, for joining. Anju, any closing note from you?
No, thanks everyone for joining. Please make sure that you attend our sessions tomorrow evening. Go and look at agenda. We'll see you guys tomorrow. And thanks so much.
Bye, everybody. Have a great night.
Bye-bye.